Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the marble-paved streets of Imperial Rome, where torchlight flickers off columns and laughter echoes through alleyways that smell of wine, sweat, and roasting meat. You wander as if in a dream, hearing whispers of gatherings so wild that even modern tabloids would blush. Imagine a city where senators and slaves rub shoulders in the same courtyard, and where the night is an open invitation to indulgence. And here's the reality check. You probably wouldn't last more than an hour without either collapsing from overdrinking or being swept into some ritual you can't politely exit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, because you might fall asleep during this story, and share only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to know whether you're listening to Rome's scandals at sunrise or at 2 a.m. Now, turn off the lights and lie down on your chair or bed, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You step beyond the familiar bustle of a Rome's daytime markets into its velvet nights. The air itself feels different, cooler, saltier from the Tiber's slow crawl, yet charged with anticipation. Musicians pluck their lyres at the edge of courtyards, signaling the start of a gathering where pleasure is not shameful, but woven into the fabric of civic life. In fact, there were moments in Roman history when sex wasn't just tolerated, it was paraded. Emperors like Caligula and Nero became notorious for blurring the line between public performance and private indulgence, sometimes inviting whole audiences to witness their theatrics. Historians still argue whether these shows were exaggerated by scandalized senators or whether Rome truly institutionalized debauchery at the highest level. As you drift deeper into the night, the laughter grows louder. Villas open their gates to guests of every rank, and the parties begin with food, always the food. Trays of figs dripping with honey, roasted dormice sprinkled with poppy seeds, platters of oysters hauled fresh from the coast. But the banquets were never really about the menu. The trick was excess, to eat reclining on couches, fed by attendants, while wine mixed with herbs and resins flowed endlessly. You notice amphorae of Falernian wine, so potent it could be diluted several times and still leave guests stumbling. The quirky tidbit? Romans sometimes cooled their wine with snow shipped from the Apennines, stored in underground pits. Imagine trucking ice across mountains 2,000 years ago, just to make your party cocktails extra fancy. Yet the feasting is only a warm-up. Soon, entertainers arrive. Dancers painted in gold leaf, actors performing obscene parodies, even gladiators stripped of armor to play new roles. You catch sight of masks being passed around. They aren't just costumes, they're invitations to anonymity. Once hidden behind clay and paint, senators could mingle with slaves and wives with strangers without consequence. It's the perfect shield for indulgence. Modern masquerade balls owe something to this Roman playbook. But Rome didn't just encourage these spectacles privately. Some emperors staged entire orgies disguised as festivals, ensuring the public knew pleasure was a civic virtue. The scholarly debate lingers. Were these events a clever tool of control? Bread, circuses, and flesh to distract the masses? Or were they genuinely the reflection of a culture that saw pleasure as divine tribute? Either way, when you walk into such a gathering, you sense a dangerous freedom. No hierarchy, no restraint. At least for one night, you imagine yourself reclining on a couch beside patricians who once gave stern speeches in the forum. Tonight, though, they're trading jokes, sloshing wine onto their togas, and maybe even daring to sing bawdy songs out of tune. A senator hiccups through a line about Jupiter's thunderbolt being no bigger than his candle. You chuckle, but quietly. You've got to pace your laughter, or you'll draw attention. And in Rome, attention can mean being dragged into the center of the spectacle, asked to juggle, sing, or worse. You suddenly understand why every guest keeps an escape strategy in mind. The night wears on, and the city's pulse quickens. Streets echo with processions carrying torches and drums. Public colonnades turn into stages. Fountains bubble with diluted wine, and Rome feels like a giant carnival. You pass by a temple courtyard where dancers swirl half-clothed, invoking Bacchus, god of wine and ecstasy. Their chants rise, their eyes gleam unnervingly, and you wonder, was this worship or just an excuse for chaos? Historians still debate whether these rites were religious rituals that morphed into orgiastic celebrations, or simply the other way around. Either way, you find yourself tapping along, drawn by the hypnotic rhythm. You can't escape the mix of awe and absurdity. One moment, you're dazzled by golden torches reflecting off marble. The next, you're suppressing a laugh at some nobleman's drunken attempt to climb a statue of Venus. He slips, lands in a fountain, and is applauded as though he just won a chariot race. In Rome, even humiliation could be entertainment, and somewhere in the crowd, you realize the deeper point. These public indulgences weren't just about sex or food. They were about erasing boundaries between classes, genders, even sacred and profane. For one night, at least, Rome allowed itself to forget the rigidity of its laws and hierarchies. And you, caught in the middle of it, can't help but wonder if the empire's strength came not from discipline, but from these moments of chaos that let everyone breathe. Of course, you know better. The indulgence has a price. Tomorrow, senators will wake with headaches, slaves will clean the courtyards, and gossip will spread faster than the Tiber's flow. But tonight, in the thick of it, you can't resist smiling. After all, if history teaches us anything, it's that humans have always loved to party, just with more laurel wreaths and fewer Spotify playlists. You lean back, listening as a poet recites verses half in jest, half in lust, while a flute trills softly in the corner. The night stretches before you, long, unpredictable, and shimmering with torchlight. And this is only the beginning. Rome's wild nights are about to plunge even deeper. You linger on the marble steps, where the scent of incense curls upward and blends with the heavier aroma of roasted meats and perfumed oil. The night's energy guides you toward a temple, though temple feels misleading, because what you're about to witness is less solemn worship and more of a carnival dressed in sacred garb. Rome had a knack for blurring lines, and here, in the shadow of Corinthian columns, desire itself becomes a ritual. At first, the scene is orderly. Priests and priestesses arrange offerings, bowls of fruit, wreaths of laurel, statues of gods polished until they gleam like wet stone. Worshippers arrive with candles, their faces soft in the flickering glow. But gradually, the atmosphere shifts. The chants rise, bodies press closer, and the temple transforms from a place of prayer into a place where inhibitions dissolve. You've walked into what later satirists love to exaggerate, temples of desire, where the divine was honored through human indulgence. A mainstream fact strikes you here. Some Roman cults, particularly those of Bacchus and Venus, genuinely incorporated fertility rites, which often involve symbolic or even literal sexual activity. The Senate once tried to suppress the Bacchanalia in 186 BCE, fearing they encouraged political conspiracy under the guise of pleasure. Historians still argue whether the crackdown was about morality or simply about senators losing control over popular gatherings. The crowd grows restless. Someone scatters rose petals across the temple floor, and sandals crunch over them as people sway to the beat of drums. Musicians slip in with flutes, the reedy notes spiraling through the pillars. You see couples drawing close, whispering with laughter that seems more intoxicating than the wine goblets circulating. And here's your quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes anointed themselves with crocodile dung mixed into oils as a supposed contraceptive. Imagine the scent mingling with frankincense. Suddenly, the temple feels less divine and more like a bizarre apothecary experiment. But you can't deny the spectacle. Statues of Venus, draped in silk, seem to glow under torchlight, and dancers paint their faces with streaks of gold dust. They swirl around the altar, their movements both reverent and suggestive, each gesture promising pleasure disguised as piety. You realize that in Rome, the gods were never far from human desire. They were entwined, legitimizing what in other cultures might be condemned. As the night deepens, the temple doors remain open, and strangers slip in from the streets. Masks cover some faces, tunics loosen on others, and laughter erupts like waves. You imagine yourself caught in the tide, pushed one way by the music, pulled another by curious hands. There is a sense of surrender here, of letting the divine excuse human weakness. You think of modern festivals where people lose themselves in crowds, except this one has marble altars and priests nodding approvingly. A priest raises a cup of wine, chanting to Bacchus, and the crowd answers with cheers. The wine spills, staining marble red like blood from a sacrifice. But tonight, no animals are slaughtered. Instead, the sacrifice is inhibition. People toast, drink deeply, and kiss whoever stands nearest. You might be startled, but here it is celebrated. Some Romans even wrote poetry about such nights, praising the mingling of sacred and sensual as the highest form of offering. The scholarly debate enters your thoughts. Did Romans truly believe the gods demanded such behavior? Or did the people cleverly use religion as a cloak for indulgence? Ancient writers give both answers. Some scolded the festivals as corruption. Others defended them as authentic devotion. You shrug. Perhaps both are true. After all, humans excel at justifying their pleasures. Suddenly, the temple feels like a stage play. An actor dressed as Saturn declaims verses, while behind him a pair of dancers twirl dangerously close to the altar flame. The crowd gasps when one dancer's sleeve catches fire, but instead of panic, Laughter bursts out as another guest douses the flame with his wine cup. You chuckle along. Rome always found comedy in chaos. And then there's a softer moment. A woman drapes a garland around your neck, her eyes bright as she whispers a wish to Venus. She doesn't ask your name, doesn't care who you are. In that instant, you're both worshiper and participant in something bigger, stranger, and oddly tender. It's not about love, not even lust. It's about belonging to the shared pulse of the night. You remember the senator you saw earlier at the banquet. His toga, now stained, his dignity forgotten. Here he stands barefoot, swaying like a boy, his ringlets of hair plastered to his sweaty forehead. Tomorrow, he'll thunder in the forum about civic duty, but tonight, he's just another body under the goddess's gaze. By the time you step back into the open air, dawn is only a rumor at the horizon. The temple still hums behind you, torches flickering, chants echoing faintly. You realize you've seen Rome at its most paradoxical, a culture that preached order yet cherished disorder, that built marble temples only to fill them with laughter, song, and sin. And as you wander back into the night streets, you can't help but grin, because the Romans weren't ashamed to say it. Sometimes worship tasted a lot like pleasure. The temple's incense still clings to your skin as you follow the sound of laughter and clinking cups into another grand hall. This time, the destination isn't sacred at all. It's the private dining room of a wealthy Roman patron. The heavy bronze doors swing open, and you're hit with a wall of heat, light, and smells that make your stomach both rumble and churn. These aren't quiet suppers. They're banquets of excess, where food is merely the warm-up act for whatever follows. The room is wide and low-lit, with oil lamps hung from chains. Reclining couches line three sides of the table, leaving the center open for servers and entertainers to circulate. Guests sprawl sideways, propped up on cushions, one hand reaching lazily for grapes or goblets, the other hand occasionally gesturing wildly in conversation. You hesitate, but then you realize this is where the real social currency of Rome gets exchanged. Deals, gossip, betrayals, and plenty of bragging about who has the rarest spices or the fattest peacocks. The food itself is staggering. Picture a platter of flamingo tongues, delicacies praised for their rarity more than their taste. Next comes stuffed dormice rolled in honey and poppy seeds, then eels marinated in wine and garum. Rome's famous fish sauce so pungent that modern noses would bolt for the door. And here's your quirky tidbit. Roman chefs sometimes dusted dishes with powdered silphium, an herb they valued so much as an aphrodisiac and contraceptive that it literally went extinct from overharvesting. Imagine seasoning your stew with the last unicorn horn. You glance at the wine amphorae stacked along the wall, each stamped with the vineyard's seal. The favorite? Falernian, a wine so strong that writers joked it could ignite if exposed to flame. Diluted or not, it flows non-stop, served by slaves whose arms already shake from the weight of pouring. Guests deliberately drink too much because staggering is part of the spectacle. One senator, red-faced, tries to stand and proclaim a poem to Jupiter, only to collapse into a roasted boar's platter. The table erupts in laughter. Romans loved slapstick as much as Shakespeare's audiences would centuries later. Historians still argue whether these accounts of endless extravagance, vomitoria, jewel-studded dishes, even live animals paraded across tables, were accurate or exaggerated by satirists like Juvenal. You sip your wine and glance around. Whether or not every detail is true, the spirit of excess is undeniable. Here, gluttony is virtue. The more outrageous the spread, the more status for the host. And then the entertainment begins. Musicians pluck lyres, dancers sway to syncopated beats, and soon jugglers toss flaming torches dangerously close to the silk curtains. A trained monkey scampers across the table, stealing dates from the senator who just face-planted in the boar. Instead of outrage, the room roars with applause. For a moment, you wonder if you've wandered onto a chaotic stage play rather than a dinner. But the real twist is how quickly the food gives way to something else. Servants quietly clear the dishes, and couches shift closer. The host claps his hands, and suddenly, the performers aren't juggling anymore. They're undressing to laughter and whistles. Banquet halls in Rome were not shy about shifting gears. After all, everyone reclined already, full of wine and good humor. The party simply tilts from feasting to indulgence without pause. You catch yourself thinking about how modern people would react. Imagine your local town hall throwing a feast that dissolves into a masquerade of flirtations under the watchful eye of politicians. That was Rome. Power and pleasure intertwined, not hidden. And yet, you sense a rule beneath the chaos. Participation is optional. Observation is acceptable. If you're too shy, you can just sip your wine and laugh at the senator chasing the monkey again. The night thickens with smells, wine-soaked cushions, garum lingering in the air, sweat from dancers twirling in circles. You lean back and realize why Romans adored these banquets. They were rehearsals for forgetting life's burdens. In a city buzzing with politics, lawsuits, and military campaigns, this was where the sharp edges dulled. Here, everyone pretended they were gods for a night, with endless food, endless wine, and endless possibility. A joke drifts across the table. May your purse be as bottomless as your cup. Guests roar. You smile, noting the universality. 2,000 years later, people still crack drunk jokes that barely make sense. And that's the charm. Beneath all the marble and excess, Romans were still just humans, craving release. Finally, the host raises his goblet, wine sloshing down his wrist, and declares the feast a success. But he isn't done. He hints that the true entertainment begins in the adjoining chamber. A murmur ripples through the couches. Some guests immediately stumble after him. Others remain, picking through leftover grapes, debating whether to risk the plunge. And you find your curiosity piqued, because if this banquet was only the appetizer, you can barely imagine what the Romans considered the main course. Street music tugs you off the couches and back under the night sky, where Rome has solved shyness with a simple technology, the mask. Torchlight licks stucco walls, and every alley breathes out people with borrowed faces, foxes, doves, and theater visages carved into permanent gasps. You slip into the stream and feel your shoulders drop. When everyone is disguised, status blurs. You are no one in particular, which is a wonderfully liberating role. The masks, of course, have their roots in the theater, the persona of comedy and tragedy. But tonight, the theater has spilled over into the streets. Senators, freedmen, merchants, and children all mingle behind painted linen or thin wood, ribbons tied clumsily at the back of their heads. Think of it as Roman incognito mode, no browser history, but plenty of opportunities to bump into torch stands while pretending to be someone else. A mainstream anchor steadies you. These carnivals weren't underground rebellions. They were ludi, public festivals, literally games, funded by magistrates like the Eagles, using state money and private ambition. They were civic events, not secret vices. Floralia, for instance, returned each spring with garlands, comedy skits, and showers of petals. Writers like Cato scolded them as indecent, while later Christians like Tertullian thundered against the immodesty. Historians still argue whether reports of nudity at the finale were fact or moral exaggeration. But the mood of license was real enough. You pause at a cart piled high with masks, satyrs with corkscrew beards, owls with gilded rims, smooth almond-eyed faces dusted with saffron. Here's a quirky tidbit. Romans perfumed masks and wigs with saffron or myrrh to disguise the less romantic smells of wine, sweat, and garum. You pick one, tie it on, and the world narrows to two golden slits. Everything looks sharper, more theatrical, as if Rome itself has stepped onto a stage. Music binds the alleys together. Pipes, drums, clapping. A troupe of mimes lampoons a pompous official, tripping over his own procession garlands. The crowd hoots. Satire is democracy's second cousin. Someone thrusts a cup of watered wine into your hand. You drink too fast, cough, and joke silently that fate will not write death by grape juice on your epitaph. Masks don't just hide, they invite play. A baker struts like a satyr, tail pinned to his belt. A matron recites bawdy verses with a comic grin, freed from gossip by anonymity. The crowd loves it, tossing coins her way. That's the economy of public support. Treasury money opens the stage, but the people's cheers decide the encore. You drift with the procession into a garlanded courtyard, where a collegium, a neighborhood association, has strung ivy and hired musicians. At the gate, an attendant hands you a small clay token. It looks suspiciously like the numbered spintriae sometimes linked to brothels. But tonight, it's just crowd management. Inside, the games are delightfully absurd. Reciting Virgil with a mouthful of grapes. A dance judged by the neighborhood's oldest grandmother. A mock trial where Cupid is convicted of theft. The laughter is communal, medicinal. Even the lictors, rods in hand, tap their feet before remembering to frown. You remember the crocodile dung ointments from earlier temples and grin when a woman in a leopard mask sighs that she forgot her special perfume. Joke number 2. You wonder if leopard print counts as timeless Roman fashion, or just humanity's longest-running trend. The revelry swells. Wreaths float in a fountain. Whichever drifts to you predicts your dance partner. Yours noses toward you, then sinks dramatically. Joke number 3. Apparently, destiny saw you, shrugged, and went for a swim. You rescue the soggy garland and crown a statue, earning applause for diplomatic creativity. An elder in a plain mask offers wisdom. Masks were rougher in his youth. The moon was larger, the songs filthier. He presses an orange peel into your cheek, claiming it masks wine breath. You chew and discover it tastes like candied candlewick. Still, it's oddly refreshing. And here's the quiet genius. Though wine flows, the crowd largely manages itself. A scuffle starts near the colonnade. But neighbors intervene, musicians shift tempo, and the heat drains. Historians still argue whether these festivals were healthy safety valves or corrosive indulgence. But tonight, you feel the rhythm of a community that knows its own limits. As drums soften, priests appear not to scold, but to join in. They smile, greet neighbors, bless the garlands. The message is clear. The city sanctions joy. So long as joy remembers its place among neighbors, one final hum vibrates through the square like a communal sigh, and masks slip off. Faces reemerge smeared with saffron, eyes heavy with wine. Anonymity was a borrowed luxury. Identity is the home to which everyone returns. You tug your mask loose, dangle it from your hand, and step into the street. More music leaks from a doorway ahead. The night isn't over. Rome is simply ready for its next costume. The city breathes in steam. You notice it first drifting like smoke above the rooftops, curling from the grand domes and tiled arches of Rome's public baths. You follow the scent of olive oil and damp stone until you reach a massive doorway buzzing with voices. Inside, the air is warmer, wetter, and alive with chatter. These aren't just places to scrub dirt away. They're the empire's social engines. And by nightfall, the baths become something even wilder, half wellnessy, half playground of secrets. You step onto heated stone floors, feeling the temperature rise with every archway you cross. The frigidarium, cool and then open, greets newcomers. The tepidarium glows with softer light, air humid and comforting. And finally, the caldarium, a furnace of steam so thick you can barely see faces, only glistening outlines of bodies reclining, talking, laughing. It's in these misty spaces that Rome practiced a unique blend of hygiene, politics, and pleasure. A mainstream fact anchors your thoughts. The baths of Caracalla, completed in 216 CE, could host more than 1,500 bathers at once. These complexes weren't simple pools. They contained libraries, gardens, gyms, even snack bars. Historians still argue whether their funding was an act of civic generosity or a calculated tool of political propaganda. You sip watered wine and think, probably both. After all, who complains about the emperor when they're soaking in heated marble tubs? But tonight, the baths are shifting from civic space to carnival. Musicians slip in with pipes. Dancers swirl their translucent scarves in the mist. And someone tosses flower petals into the pools until they stick to damp shoulders. The usual murmur of polite conversation dissolves into giggles and splashing. You spot a group daring each other to plunge from the marble steps, while others recline shoulder to shoulder, whispering conspiracies or perhaps flirtations. Who can tell in the mist? Here's your quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes rubbed themselves with oil, mixed with ground pumice, before scraping it off with a strigil, a curved bronze tool. The result? They left the baths polished like statues. Tonight, the strigils double as party favors, gleaming in torchlight, waved around by drunken bathers like spoons at a wedding. Someone even pretends to knight a fellow guest with one, tapping his shoulders solemnly before collapsing into laughter. You wander deeper, drawn to the tholos, a circular steam chamber where the heat fogs your vision entirely. Voices echo strangely. Footsteps sound nearer or farther than they really are. In this blur, Anonymity reigns, an echo of the masked carnivals outside. Except here, the disguise is sweat and steam. You imagine senators cutting deals in whispers, gladiators showing off scars, poets composing verses on fogged walls that drip away before dawn. And the humor of it all? Somewhere, an attendant is still trying to enforce rules. No running, no diving, he barks, only to slip on the wet marble and tumble into the pool himself. The crowd erupts in applause. And you realize Romans laughed hardest when dignity drowned in a splash. Historians still debate whether the baths truly hosted revelries at night or if satirists exaggerated. But fragments of graffiti suggest otherwise. Little sketches of lovers, crude jokes scratched into walls. Even the architecture encouraged it. Alcoves, private rooms, and gardens perfect for vanishing a while. And because the baths were public and technically sanctioned, the line between leisure and mischief blurred without shame. As you sink onto a bench, steam wrapping your body like a cloak, you hear poetry being recited from the far side of the chamber. The words are half muffled, but the rhythm is clear. Catullus, or maybe Ovid, verses about desire that turn the air even thicker. A ripple of laughter follows, someone answering with their own body improvisation. You chuckle, recognizing that in Rome, humor and lust were constant companions, each giving permission to the other. Then, as if the night hasn't already blurred enough, trays of fruit and wine appear, carried in by attendants, balancing carefully over slippery stones. Guests cheer, raising cups, sipping between plunges into hot pools and cold baths. You nibble on figs, warm from the steam, their sweetness strange against the mineral tang of water. It's indulgence squared, eating while bathing, laughing while sweating, drinking while cleansing. You're not sure whether you're purified or utterly spoiled. By the time you finally step back into the open air, your skin prickles with night chill. Your head swims from wine and heat, and your heart races from the odd thrill of it all. You glance back at the great arches of the bathhouse, steam still curling skyward like Rome exhaling. These weren't just spas. They were theaters of humanity, where the empire staged both its civility and its chaos. You wander into the cooler streets, hair damp, toga clinging, and realize the baths weren't the end of the night. They were merely another portal. Somewhere ahead, music grows louder again. Rome isn't done with you yet. The steam from the bathhouse hasn't yet left your hair when you're drawn onward by a ripple of voices that sound sharper, louder, more commanding. You pass a row of statues glistening with torchlight and come upon a villa so brightly lit it seems to glow against the dark sky. At the gate, guards stand casually but unmistakably armed, their eyes sharp, even through the haze of incense. This is no neighborhood feast. No, casual street revelry. Tonight, the emperor himself is host, and when Rome's rulers preside, the line between power and pleasure evaporates completely. You slip through the threshold into a hall, draped in crimson cloth, pillars wound with garlands, and ceilings painted with gods lounging as if they too were invited. The scale overwhelms you. Dozens of couches arranged in concentric circles, fountains bubbling wine, and musicians already striking chords that resonate across the marble. To be here is to witness politics disguised as entertainment. If you're reclining within these walls, you're important, or at least useful. A mainstream anchor grounds your vision. Suetonius, the biographer of emperors, recorded the scandalous habits of rulers like Caligula and Nero. Caligula supposedly turned the palace into a brothel, while Nero staged theatrical feasts where he performed songs as the crowd indulged. Historians still argue whether these were factual accounts or moral smear campaigns by hostile senators, but the overlap of spectacle and statecraft is undeniable. The emperor arrives, draped in shimmering silk rather than the sober white of a toga. His presence transforms the room instantly. Guests stand, cups raised, some feigning awe, others truly spellbound. And then, with a sly grin, he waves for everyone to recline again. A slave refills your goblet before you can protest, and the mood shifts. Relief, laughter, and the bubbling anticipation of what absurdities the ruler might demand tonight. Here's a quirky tidbit. Nero reportedly had banquet halls rigged with ceilings that rained rose petals on diners, sometimes so heavily that people nearly suffocated under the fragrant avalanche. As petals drift down tonight, you instinctively brush your shoulders, half wondering whether you'll survive Rome's version of floral decor. The emperor gestures, and entertainment unfolds with military precision. A troupe of actors performs a parody of Jupiter's thunderbolts, using inflated bladders that squeak with every swing. The crowd roars. Senators who usually posture with dignity now clutch their sides in laughter, eager to match the emperor's mood. You realize the humor isn't just for fun. It's a loyalty test. If you fail to laugh, you stand out, and standing out under an emperor's eye is a dangerous game. Wine flows as freely as political flattery. A general boasts of victories while wiping pomegranate juice from his chin. A poet recites verses so risque you nearly choke on your fig. And then, without warning, the emperor rises and joins the performers, strumming a lyre, his voice echoing off marble. The audience erupts into thunderous applause, whether the music is divine or dreadful. That's the joke of the night. In Rome, emperors were both gods and stand-up comedians, and you clapped either way if you valued your head. You can't ignore the undercurrent of unease. Slaves move quickly, pouring, fetching, bowing low, eyes darting. Behind every indulgence lies the reminder that one command from the emperor could change destinies. Pleasure and terror waltz hand in hand here. You sip your wine slower now, aware that intoxication is dangerous when the room itself feels like a test, and yet the allure is undeniable. Guests lean into couches, togas loosen, the laughter grows louder. The emperor claps again, and the next act is less theatrical, more indulgent. The curtains part to reveal dancers drenched in oil, their movements deliberate, slow, meant to mesmerize. The crowd leans forward, whispering, gasping, some clapping in rhythm. You realize this isn't just spectacle, it's orchestration. The ruler directs desire as though it were another instrument in his orchestra of power. Historians still debate whether these infamous feasts were exaggerated by moralists trying to paint emperors as monsters, or whether the excess truly reflected Rome's ruling elite. But you, in this moment, can't help but feel the truth lies somewhere in between. The laughter, the petals, the music, the indulgence, they all feel too vivid to be entirely fabricated. And the tension, the awareness that at any second the Emperor might point, command, or ridicule feels too sharp to be just rumor. Then comes the night's strangest scene. The Emperor calls for silence and announces a contest. Whoever composes the wittiest toast wins a golden cup. The room buzzes with anticipation. A senator stammers out a rhyme, comparing Bacchus to a war chariot. Polite chuckles. A poet dares a bawdier verse, earning real laughter. Then, shockingly, the Emperor points at you. The crowd falls silent. All eyes turn. You freeze, cup in hand. What can you possibly say that won't offend or bore? The wine musters courage for you, and you lift your goblet. May Rome's glory outlast even tonight's hangover, you declare. For a moment, silence. Then, laughter, genuine and contagious. The Emperor grins, raises his cup, and drinks in your honor. Relief floods you. You've passed the test, at least for now. By the time the banquet fades into softer music, you're exhausted. The Emperor retreats, guests stagger out, and the torches dim. But the lesson lingers. In Rome, pleasure wasn't just recreation. It was politics, theater, and survival. To recline at the Emperor's feast was both an honor and a gamble. You step back into the night, petals still clinging to your hair, heart pounding, wondering how long the empire can balance on such precarious laughter. The echoes of the Emperor's laughter still rattle in your head as you drift toward a quieter corner of the city. The torches here are dimmer, the music softer, and the crowd less frenzied. You've stumbled into the orbit of Rome's intellectuals and artists, the courtesans and poets who spin passion into art and art into power. Here, indulgence is not staged with thunderbolts and rose-petal avalanches, but whispered in verses and wrapped in silk. You recline near a fountain where poets gather, their voices weaving a tapestry of words that drape the night. Some recite Ovid's playful lines from the Ars Amatoria, others parody Virgil with bawdy twists. The crowd, smaller but more refined, hums with delight at each clever turn. In this world, wit is the ultimate seduction, and the courtesans are the masters. These women, educated, witty, trained in conversation, command influence beyond what their titles suggest. They're not wives bound by strict Roman household laws, but companions who move in salons and villas, wielding words as skillfully as soldiers wield swords. A mainstream fact steadies you. Elite courtesans, or meretrices honesty, weren't confined to brothels. They mingled openly in literary circles, sometimes even becoming muses to poets and artists. The poet Propertius immortalized his lover Cynthia in verse, while Catullus sang of Lesbia, possibly a courtesan herself. Historians still argue whether these women were actual companions or fictional composites, but their presence in Rome's cultural memory is undeniable. As you sip watered wine, a courtesan approaches, draped in saffron silk that shimmers in torchlight. Her perfume, heavy with myrrh, lingers as she leans close, teasing you with a riddle in verse. You stammer a reply, half flustered, half amused, and she rewards you with a sly smile. Here's your quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes sprinkled their wine with edible gold flakes. believing it stimulated passion. Tonight, your cup glitters faintly in the lamplight, though you suspect it's mostly a clever trick of the host to impress. The poets continue their duel, trading epigrams sharper than gladiators' swords. One lampoons a senator's baldness, another mocks the emperor's latest musical performance, and the crowd erupts in muffled laughter. It's risky, of course. Mockery of power could earn exile, but that danger is part of the thrill. You wonder if satire is Rome's true second language, the way it sneaks between feasts and forums alike. The courtesans, meanwhile, glide through the gathering like priestesses of wit. They recite verses, challenge philosophers to debates, and laugh at their own boldness. In a city where women's public roles were limited, courtesans carved out power in the shadows of art and intimacy, and tonight they preside with more authority than any senator in a toga. One courtesan leans back, her laughter chiming like silver bells, and recites a parody of Ovid. "Love is war, but I always win the battle." The crowd claps, and you can't help but laugh too, realizing she's right. Her confidence slices through the smoky night like a blade. Historians still debate whether these literary salons were truly common or merely the fantasies of poets idealizing their muses. Some argue they were rare pockets of freedom, others that they flourished quietly across the city. But standing here, you sense their power. These nights weren't just entertainment. They were workshops where culture was shaped, where verses that outlasted empires were first spoken aloud under flickering lamps. And the humor of it all? A poet, trying to impress, leaps dramatically onto the fountain's edge, only to slip and plunge waist-deep into the water. The crowd howls with laughter, and someone tosses him a fig as consolation. You chuckle. Rome always found a way to make dignity optional. As the night deepens, the courtesans gather closer, their voices weaving softer verses, almost lullabies. The wine dulls, the torches sputter, and the mood shifts from playful to intimate. You find yourself lulled not by spectacle, but by words, gentle, clever, and timeless. In a city obsessed with marble and might, it's remarkable how much power lies in laughter, rhyme, and a whisper shared between strangers. When you finally step away, the streets are quieter, the torches fewer, but the echoes of poetry and perfume cling to you. Proof that Rome's heart wasn't only in its arenas or palaces. It also beat in the verses of poets and the laughter of courtesans who knew how to turn desire into art. The poet's verses still hum in your ears as you drift toward another gathering place, one more raucous than refined. You follow the trail of stomping feet and the brassy squeal of double pipes until you stumble into a courtyard lit like daylight with torches. Here, the mood is entirely different. Less wit and elegance, more wild abandon. Tonight, wine, music, and madness rule the night. The first thing you notice is the amphorae. They're everywhere, tipped sideways on racks, mouths gaping like laughing faces. Slaves dart back and forth, filling cups faster than guests can empty them. The wine is thick, almost syrupy, and spiced with herbs, cinnamon, fennel, even pepper. You take a sip, and your mouth bursts with fire. You cough, nearly choke, but the crowd only roars with laughter at your rookie mistake. Someone pats your back, shouting, "Dilute it next time, stranger." Too late. You're already dizzy. A mainstream fact steadies you. Roman banquets and festivals often mixed wine with water in a ratio chosen by the host. Drinking it undiluted was considered barbaric. Yet some emperors, like Elagabalus, flaunted this convention to show how boldly they lived. Historians still argue whether Rome's wildest drinking parties were the norm or sensational exceptions. But even conservative writers admitted Romans rarely trusted a sober party. The music swells, drummers pound in unison, pipes screech, cymbals clash. Guests clap off-beat, their laughter tumbling into the rhythm until the whole courtyard becomes a single pulsing heartbeat. The air is thick with heat, wine fumes, and smoke from torches. Here's your quirky tidbit. To keep wine cool, Romans sometimes stored amphorae in fountains or streams, then fished them out mid-party like fishing for prizes. You watch as two men wrestle an amphora from the courtyard fountain, sloshing half of it onto themselves, then toast each other as if the spill were part of the fun. The dancing begins. First one woman, then another, swirling scarves, stomping feet, hips swinging in time with the drums. Soon everyone joins, whether graceful or graceless, and the courtyard floor rattles with the chaos of dozens of sandals, stomping at once. You're dragged into the circle, spinning clumsily, trying to keep up. You laugh so hard, your sides ache. The Romans don't care if you dance well. They care that you dance loudly. Historians still debate whether these communal frenzies were spontaneous outbreaks or carefully orchestrated entertainments by hosts eager to impress. Tonight, you sense both. The musicians keep the beat steady, but the guests add the fire, inventing new steps, spilling wine, toppling onto cushions with laughter. And then come the games. A host announces a contest. Whoever can drink the most without collapsing wins a silver cup. Cheers erupt. You watch as men and women alike gulp wine in reckless competition, only to wobble, hiccup, and eventually roll sideways off their couches. The crowd cheers the failures louder than the successes, clapping as each challenger surrenders to dizziness. The last woman standing, barefoot, hair wild, raises her goblet in triumph, wine sloshing over her arm. The silver cup is hers, though you suspect she won't remember it tomorrow. 3 jokes lighten the madness tonight. First, a man stands on a table to sing, only to crash through it mid-note, splintering wood as the crowd roars approval. Second, a guest mistakes an amphora of olive oil for wine and gulps, sputtering with such dramatic despair that the musicians strike up a mock funeral dirge until he recovers. Third, 2 poets challenge each other to recite verses while hiccuping, and the resulting nonsense sends the crowd into uncontrollable laughter. And yet, amid the chaos, something deeper flickers. Romans knew these moments of wildness had a purpose: to break the strict order of daily life, to dissolve status, to remind citizens that pleasure was part of civic identity. The madness wasn't purely madness, it was ritual release. Even Cicero, who scolded drunkenness, admitted that in moderation, these nights could strengthen bonds of friendship and loyalty. The music grows frenzied, torches burn low, and you realize dawn is creeping close. But no one stops. Guests clutch each other, swaying, singing, their voices hoarse and joyful. The musicians keep pounding, as if the sun itself must wait for the party's permission to rise. You sink onto a cushion, heart racing, ears ringing, and smile. In this courtyard, for this one night, the empire is united not by laws or legions, but by rhythm, laughter, and too much wine. When the last torch finally sputters and the musicians collapse from exhaustion, the courtyard is littered with empty cups, overturned couches, and bodies sprawled like fallen statues. You stagger back into the street, blinking at the first streaks of dawn, and realize Rome hasn't tired yet. It's simply catching its breath for the next frenzy. The dawn haze barely fades before the city surges again. But this time, with a festival so big, it swallows every alley, every courtyard, every forum square. You've arrived in the middle of Saturnalia, the week-long December celebration where Rome turns itself upside down, laughs at its own rules, and bathes the empire in joyful chaos. If you thought last night's courtyard party was wild, you soon realize Saturnalia is that chaos magnified tenfold and made respectable because the entire city joins in. You hear it first in the chants. Crowds of men and women, wrapped in bright cloaks, march together shouting, "Io Saturnalia," at anyone they pass. The cry is less a greeting and more a command. You must answer with the same shout, or risk being pelted with nuts or figs. You test it. A group of children spot you, shout, "Io Saturnalia," and giggle as you stammer a reply. They cheer as though you've passed the test, tossing a handful of chestnuts your way. A mainstream fact grounds your wandering mind. Saturnalia honored Saturn, the god of sowing and abundance. But by the late Republic and Empire, it was less about agriculture and more about inversion of order. Slaves dined like masters. Masters served them food, and business ground to a halt. Historians still argue whether this reversal truly gave slaves relief or was just a symbolic gesture to reinforce the usual hierarchy afterward. Either way, you quickly see the joy of it. Order suspended, chaos blessed. Here's your quirky tidbit. During Saturnalia, Romans often wore the pileus, a soft felt cap, usually associated with freed slaves. For the week, everyone donned one to symbolize freedom from normal constraints. You notice bright caps, bobbing like mushrooms in the crowd, and before you can protest, someone jams one on your head too. The wool is scratchy, but the symbolism is sweet. You too are freed, at least for now. The city transforms. Shops close. Courts suspend trials. And even the Senate locks its doors. Tables are dragged into streets, piled high with roasted meats, bread, and wine. Strangers press cups into your hand without asking your name. Dice games rattle across the stones, gambling forbidden on normal days but embraced now with glee. A slave tosses dice against his master, wins, and the crowd roars. The master laughs along, raising his cup in mock surrender. Everywhere, disguises and role swaps flourish. You watch a toga-clad senator sweep the streets with a broom while his servant, wearing a borrowed wreath, reclines on a couch demanding grapes. The absurdity is the point. Rome's stiff social ladder gets flipped like a board game, and everyone plays along. Joke number one of the night. A group of slaves, newly masters, order their lord to sing a bawdy song. He obliges, warbling so badly the crowd begs for mercy, but they won't let him stop until his voice cracks. Music follows you wherever you walk. Flutes, tambourines, even clapping rhythms made with amphora shards. A troupe of mimes reenacts a gladiator battle using bread loaves for swords and fish for shields. The audience howls as a baker gets defeated and dramatically collapses, scattering flour into the crowd. Joke number 2 practically writes itself. Rome finally has a gluten war. The gifts come next. Saturnalia was famous for small presents, candles, figurines, even gag gifts. Someone presses a wax figurine of Hercules into your hand, its arms flexed comically large. A poet nearby unwraps his own gift, a clay pig that squeals when squeezed. The laughter is infectious. Historians still debate whether these humble tokens were meant as offerings to Saturn or just excuses for mischief. You suspect both, as the joy of giving and pranking fills the streets. By dusk, bonfires blaze in every square. Crowds gather around, singing, shouting, drinking. Strangers drape arms across each other's shoulders as though they've been friends forever. Food, wine, laughter, it's all free-flowing. Saturnalia doesn't whisper pleasure in hidden corners. It blasts it from every temple, every fountain, every window. Your third joke arrives when you trip over an abandoned wreath and nearly topple into a roast boar, only to be caught by a tipsy senator in a slave's cap. He grins, declaring you his rescued property. The crowd applauds your accidental comedy. You bow dramatically, earning more cheers. Rome loves a fool, and tonight everyone is willing to play one. Yet amid the madness, you notice a strange calm. The inversion of order doesn't feel threatening. It feels therapeutic. For 1 week, the city shrugs off its armor. Even priests laugh. Even generals loosen their belts. Historians still argue whether Saturnalia weakened Roman discipline or strengthened it by releasing pressure. From where you sit, chewing roasted chestnuts by firelight, it feels like survival. Rome's way of remembering it was human beneath the marble. As the night deepens, the chant of Io Saturnalia echoes from every direction, louder, wilder, as though the city itself is laughing. You pull your felt cap lower on your forehead, raise your cup to the gods, and surrender to the festival's joyful anarchy. Rome, for now, belongs to freedom, firelight, and foolishness. The smoke of Saturnalia bonfires still stings your eyes as you follow another procession winding through Rome's streets. But this one feels different. Instead of familiar Roman songs, the music thrums with exotic rhythms, pipes with strange scales, drums beating like heartbeats from far-off deserts. You've stumbled into the orbit of Rome's foreign influences, mystery cults, and imported deities that reshape the city's appetite for both religion and revelry. You trail the crowd toward a temple adorned not with sober Roman columns, but with painted lions, gilded serpents, and incense heavy with spices you can't quite name. A banner flaps above the entrance, the cult of Isis, goddess of the Nile. Rome has borrowed gods the way it borrowed architecture and cuisine, from Egypt, from Asia Minor, from Greece, and each new arrival colors the empire's parties in its own way. A mainstream fact anchors you. By the 1st century CE, the cults of Isis, Cybele, Mithras, and Bacchus had strong footholds in Rome, despite occasional bans. These cults promised personal salvation and ecstatic rituals. very different from Rome's official, rigid state sacrifices. Historians still argue whether their popularity was due to genuine belief or simply the thrill of exotic pageantry. The crowd presses into the temple courtyard, torches flare, and dancers appear, their costumes unlike anything you've seen in Rome. Linen tunics, fringed with beads, feathered headdresses, anklets that jingle with every step. The rhythm is hypnotic, the movement sensual, the perfume intoxicating. You feel yourself swaying before you even realize you've joined the dance. Here's your quirky tidbit. Initiates of Cybele's cult, sometimes celebrated by clashing cymbals so loudly the sound could be heard for miles. Writers complained that the racket disturbed neighbors, but the noise was intentional. It created a trance, a sonic doorway into ecstasy. Tonight, as cymbals clash and pipes wail, you finally understand why neighbors might both curse and secretly crave it. The rituals are wilder than Saturnalia. Priests of Isis chant in Egyptian, their voices rising and falling like the Nile's flood. A procession carries statues of foreign gods draped in silks, parading them through the streets while showering the crowd with flower petals. In the chaos, boundaries blur. Romans kiss strangers, exchange tokens, swear oaths in languages they barely know. This isn't just indulgence. It's an initiation into something that feels ancient and powerful. Historians still debate whether these imported festivals were genuine spiritual movements or convenient excuses for hedonism. Some argue they gave comfort to Rome's poor and foreign-born populations, promising salvation beyond the grave. Others see them as the empire's way of packaging pleasure under divine branding. You sip wine, dizzy from the incense, and think, why not both? Then, suddenly, the music changes. A group dressed in Eastern robes pours into the square, their steps pounding in rhythm as they whip themselves into a frenzy. The crowd gasps, some cheering, some crossing themselves nervously. The ritual is half terrifying, half magnetic. One woman collapses in the dust, trembling as though possessed. A priest sprinkles her with perfumed water, and she rises, laughing wildly, embraced by the crowd as if reborn. The humor isn't lost, though. A tipsy senator, trying to imitate the ritual dance, trips on his tunic and lands in a basket of figs. The crowd howls with laughter, and someone crowns him priest of fruit. That's joke number 1 for the night. Joke 2. A Greek poet declares in mock seriousness that Rome must have imported Isis just for her parties. And joke 3 comes when a slave, pretending to be Mithras, hides behind a column and leaps out with a bull mask only to scare himself more than anyone else. You notice, too, how foreign cults offer different kinds of indulgence. Where Roman festivals revel in food and drink, these emphasize trance, rhythm, and altered states of consciousness. The intoxication here isn't just wine. It's music that won't leave your ears, incense that clogs your lungs, and chants that rattle your bones. It's chaos, rebranded as divine ecstasy. By midnight, you're swept along with the crowd as they spill back into the streets. The foreign gods return to their shrines, but their energy lingers in Rome's air. Strangers still sway to imaginary rhythms, still laugh too loudly, still clutch each other as though they've shared a secret. You realize These imported cults didn't just decorate Roman religion, they electrified it, offering new flavors of indulgence that Romans eagerly folded into their own. When you finally stumble back into the quieter alleys, you feel transformed. Rome is no longer a single city with a single set of gods. It's a carnival of borrowed faiths, each with its own brand of madness. And in that mixture, you see the empire's genius and its flaw. Everything could be Romanized, even ecstasy itself. The incense from foreign shrines still lingers in your clothes as you drift into a quieter district of the city. Here, the torches burn lower, the laughter mellower, and the air tastes less of chaos and more of perfume. You realize you've stumbled into another layer of Roman nights, one where women of power, mistresses, and matrons orchestrate pleasure on their own terms. If the emperor's halls thunder with command and foreign cults pulse with frenzy, these spaces hum with control, subtlety, and a kind of influence rarely spoken of in the Senate. You're led into a villa whose walls are frescoed not with gods or battles, but with gardens, birds, and women reclining among flowers. It's a deliberate message. Here, women rule the atmosphere. The hostess greets her guests not with booming commands, but with a knowing smile and the faintest lift of her eyebrow, enough to send slaves rushing with trays of spiced wine and honey cakes. You sense instantly that her authority is no less than a senator's, only less advertised. A mainstream fact grounds you. Elite Roman women, though barred from political office, wielded immense social influence through salons, marriages, and patronage. Figures like Clodia Metelli, sister of the notorious Clodius, were rumored to host literary circles and parties that blurred the line between politics and passion. Historians still argue whether women like her were libertines scandalized unfairly by moralizing men, or genuine rebels against the rigid expectations of Roman matrons. The villa tonight feels like their domain. Courtyards are filled with laughter as matrons sip from gilded cups, their hair jeweled with pearls. Mistresses of powerful men recline beside poets and generals, whispering secrets that could topple reputations or spark alliances. You realize that while men strut in the forum, women spin webs in the twilight, where rumor and pleasure mingle. Here's your quirky tidbit. Roman women often used elaborate cosmetics made with ground pearls, crocodile dung, or even lead-based powders to achieve a pale glow. Tonight, the face is shining under torchlight, gleam not with sweat, but with carefully painted elegance. The irony? The same cosmetics sometimes poison the skin they beautified. You watch a matron dab a white paste onto her cheeks mid-conversation, smiling as if daring the gods to object. The evening unfolds with elegance rather than frenzy. Musicians play soft melodies on harps and flutes. Poets recite verses that lean more toward tenderness than bawdiness. Instead of drunken contests, games of wit emerge. A courtesan dares a general to answer riddles, and when he stumbles, the crowd bursts into laughter. It isn't about humiliation. It's about play. A social dance where women lead and men follow, willingly or not. Joke number one for the night arrives when a pompous senator tries to flirt with a mistress by quoting Virgil, only to misquote the line so badly that she corrects him with a grin. The crowd claps for her, and the senator, red-faced, bows in mock defeat. Joke 2. A servant slips while balancing a tray of figs and the hostess quips, "Even Saturn drops his harvest." The guests roar. Joke 3. One poet insists he's invented a new love metaphor, only for another to declare it was stolen from Catullus, written 2 centuries earlier. The crowd groans and then applauds the thief anyway. Historians still debate whether such gatherings of elite women were truly subversive or simply tolerated amusements within a patriarchal system. From where you sit, sipping wine while a matron dictates which song the musicians should play, the answer feels clear. Influence doesn't always roar in public. It sometimes whispers in candlelit rooms. You're struck by how deliberate it all feels. The seating arrangements, the timing of songs, the choice of conversation topics, each decision steered by the women who host. It's pleasure, yes, but pleasure carefully choreographed to reinforce bonds, spread gossip, and test loyalties. In their hands, indulgence becomes strategy, and yet the intimacy is genuine too. A hostess leans close, sharing a secret about her husband's latest foolish boast, and the table erupts in laughter that feels less political and more simply human. Here, you sense Rome's hidden heartbeat, women carving out their spaces of joy and power in a world that pretends not to notice. By the time you step outside again, the night air feels cooler, quieter. You glance back at the villa, still glowing with music and laughter, and realize that Rome's wild nights weren't only about emperors and festivals. Sometimes they were about women who bent the rules in subtler, cleverer ways, turning salons into stages where they played roles of priestess, hostess, strategist, and queen. The laughter of matrons still echoes behind you as you wander deeper into Rome's labyrinthine streets. The villas thin out, the torchlight grows patchier, and the air carries a quieter tension. Ahead, a nondescript doorway beckons, guarded by 2 men who glance at you sharply before letting you slip inside. What waits beyond isn't a festival, a banquet, or a temple. It's one of Rome's hidden elite clubs, secret societies that thrived behind closed doors, where power and pleasure were mixed in ways too delicate or too dangerous for public eyes. The atrium you step into is smaller than the emperor's halls, but no less ornate. Marble floors shimmer with mosaics of dolphins and ivy. Oil lamps flicker against frescoes that show Bacchus leading his followers in wild revels. The couches are fewer, but the guests more carefully chosen. Senators, generals, wealthy equestrians, and foreign merchants all recline here, unmasked but unguarded, their power cloaked in secrecy rather than ceremony. The rule of this club is whispered plainly. What happens here stays here. A mainstream fact steadies your thoughts. Rome had private collegia, associations that ranged from trade guilds to dining clubs. Some were banned for fear of political conspiracy. Others survived by cloaking themselves as religious gatherings. Historians still argue whether elite dining clubs were political salons in disguise or truly pleasure-first societies with politics only as seasoning. The host, a silver-haired patrician with 2 bright eyes, welcomes you with a nod. He doesn't shout or raise a goblet. His authority is quieter, more chilling. Slaves move silently, pouring wine and placing platters of delicacies that you recognize from earlier feasts: flamingo tongues, honey cakes, roasted boar. But here, the portions are smaller, more refined. Excess isn't the goal. control is. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Roman elites dined on lettuce not for flavor, but as a supposed aphrodisiac. Tonight, platters of neatly arranged lettuce leaves circulate like currency, passed with knowing smirks. You nibble one, half amused, half wary, and wonder if Roman farmers ever guessed their crops would end up as symbols of lust. The entertainment begins subtly. A poet recites verses not for the crowd, but for a single listener, his words dripping with double meanings. A musician strums a lyre so softly that conversation must hush to catch the tune. A courtesan sings in Greek, her voice weaving through the atrium like smoke. The audience doesn't clap or roar. They nod, exchange glances, whisper. It feels less like a party and more like a performance of secrecy itself. Joke number 1 emerges when a senator, trying to impress with a witty epigram, forgets the punchline midway. The silence that follows is thick until a mistress supplies an even funnier ending, and the whole room erupts, not loudly, but with sharp, knowing laughter. Joke 2. A general boasts that he can outdrink any man present, only to fall asleep on his couch before finishing his second cup. Slaves carefully drape him with a cloak, and someone whispers, "A hero's rest." Joke 3. A merchant accidentally calls the host by the wrong name, and the host deadpans, "That was my name last week," sending the group into quiet chuckles. Historians still debate what role these private gatherings played in the empire's politics. Were senators cutting secret deals under the guise of intimate revelry, or were they genuinely escaping their burdens for a night? From where you sit, the answer is both. You can almost hear the future shifting in these whispered conversations. Alliances formed over figs, betrayals plotted over wine, policies rehearsed between jokes. The strangest part is how calm it all feels. Outside, festivals roar with music and torches. Here, indulgence is measured, intentional. It's less about losing yourself and more about revealing just enough of yourself to the right people. The courtesans here are not performers for a crowd. They're confidants, slipping between couches, murmuring encouragement, soothing egos, amplifying laughter at the right moment. You realize their influence is profound. These nights might decide careers as surely as the Forum. And yet, even in secrecy, Rome's love of spectacle sneaks through. At the night's climax, the host claps, and a troupe of dancers enters, masked as satyrs and nymphs. Their performance is sensual but restrained, more allegory than frenzy, meant to entertain without breaking the room's aura of control. Guests applaud lightly, then resume their hushed debates as though nothing unusual happened. You leave with a strange mix of awe and unease. Outside, the streets echo with drunken laughter from Saturnalia stragglers. Inside, the club hums with conversations that might shape the empire's future. Rome's wild nights aren't just about excess. Sometimes they're about subtlety, silence, and the dangerous intimacy of secrets shared over lettuce leaves and golden cups. The quiet hum of the secret club still tingles in your ears when you emerge into the cool Roman night. But outside, another sound rises. Less laughter, more argument. In the porticos of the Forum, in the shaded gardens of villas, in the very Senate house itself, voices are raised in heated debate. Rome it turns out, did not agree on its indulgences. Tonight, you overhear the great morality debates, where senators, philosophers, and citizens quarrel over whether pleasure strengthened or ruined the empire. You linger at the edge of a marble colonnade where a group of men in togas stand, goblets still in hand, their gestures sharp, their voices booming. One quotes sternly from Cato the Elder, "Luxury is the death of discipline." Another retorts with Cicero's more measured philosophy that leisure, when balanced, nourishes the soul. The argument flows like wine, spilling over every sentence, each man convinced that Rome itself teeters on the edge between glory and collapse. A mainstream fact steadies you. In the late Republic and early Empire, laws like the Lex Appia attempted to limit luxury, forbidding women from wearing too much gold or riding in carriages within the city. Though repealed, such laws reflected Rome's anxiety over excess. Historians still argue whether these laws were genuinely about morality or simply about controlling women and lower classes, while the elite quietly indulged themselves. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some senators tried to outlaw the use of peacock meat at banquets, claiming it corrupted Roman simplicity. Of course, that only made peacock meat more desirable, turning it into a symbol of defiance. Tonight, you watch as one senator, in the middle of his moral sermon, bites into a roasted peacock leg and justifies it by claiming he's researching corruption firsthand. The crowd laughs and claps, half mocking, half admiring. The debate swirls around you, alternately solemn and absurd. One philosopher insists that indulgence makes men soft, unable to defend the empire. Another argues that pleasure is Rome's reward for conquest, that without joy, victory means nothing. The mood shifts with each goblet of wine. Some nod seriously, others roll their eyes. You realize the debate is less about morality and more about identity. What does it mean to be Roman? Joke number one comes when a particularly pompous senator, trying to condemn drunkenness, hiccups mid-sentence and spills his cup down his toga. The crowd bursts into laughter, and someone shouts, "Your argument is watered down." Joke 2. A philosopher thunders that Rome's youth are corrupted by indulgence, only to trip over his sandal strap and fall flat, muttering, "See what comes of luxury footwear." Joke 3. An old general declares that wine weakens soldiers, then promptly demands a refill before continuing his speech. Historians still debate whether these public quarrels reflected real concern or were simply theater for the people. You sense both. The senators genuinely feared excess would rot Rome from within, but they also knew that condemning it loudly earned applause, even as they indulged quietly behind closed doors. Hypocrisy wasn't a bug in Roman politics. It was the feature. The argument spreads beyond senators. In nearby gardens, you hear women debating too. Some defending their right to wear silk and jewelry, others warning that too much display draws envy and scandal. A matron quips that senators spend more on their pet fish than women spend on gold. The line draws laughter and applause. You realize morality debates weren't confined to marble halls. They lived in kitchens, markets, even the chatter of slaves sweeping porticos. As the night deepens, the arguments soften, replaced by sighs, shrugs, and the occasional toast. No one convinces anyone else. But that isn't the point. Rome thrived on argument as much as on wine, and tonight, morality itself is just another dish on the banquet table. You step away, smiling at the irony. A city that conquered half the world can't decide whether a roast peacock is too fancy. The laughter and the shouting fade behind you as you wander toward the next corner of the city, where mockery itself, not philosophy, will take the stage. The echoes of senators' quarrels still chase you through the night air. But soon the noise changes. It grows sharper, wittier, less like debate and more like performance. You've arrived at another layer of Rome's nocturnal carnival, the world of satirists, jokers, and writers who made it their business to lampoon the very excesses you've been stumbling through. Here, indulgence is entertainment, but so too is mocking it. You slip into a torchlit courtyard where a small stage has been erected. The benches are packed with citizens of every class: merchants, matrons, even soldiers off duty, laughing together as performers act out parodies of the latest banquets. On stage, one man waddles about in an oversized toga, juggling roasted dormice while pretending to hiccup lines of Cicero. The crowd howls. Another performer, crowned in laurel wreaths made of cabbage leaves, mimics an emperor demanding rose petals by the cartload, only to be buried under them until he flails helplessly. A mainstream fact steadies you. Roman satire was a recognized literary form, pioneered by writers like Juvenal, Martial, and Horace. Their poems, performed or recited aloud, mocked everything from political corruption to absurd fashions. Historians still argue whether satire was a harmless outlet for frustration or a dangerous critique that skirted treason. The fact that emperors sometimes banished or punished satirists suggests it was never entirely safe. Here's your quirky tidbit. Martial, famous for his sharp epigrams, once joked about a man who hosted a dinner with only beans and cabbage, stingy beyond belief. The joke became so well known that later hosts feared serving vegetables alone, lest they be mocked as Martial's miser. Tonight, performers milk that tradition, serving the audience beans wrapped in fig leaves as a running gag. The jokes fly fast. Joke number 1. A satirist compares Roman banquets to gladiator games, except the dormice always lose. Joke 2. Another recites a mock prayer to Bacchus, begging for wine so watered down it could irrigate crops, which earns groans and laughter. Joke 3. An actor dressed as a courtesan sings a love song so exaggeratedly sweet that a dog howls in protest, making the crowd erupt even louder. The satire doesn't just poke fun at food and wine. It cuts deeper. One performer mimics a senator sneaking into a bathhouse, strutting like a rooster, then slipping on the tiles. Another mocks generals who boast of victories, but collapse after 2 cups of Falernian. The crowd laughs, but uneasily. You sense they know these barbs are close to truth. Historians still debate whether satire truly changed public opinion, or simply gave people a safe way to laugh at the powerful. But watching the audience tonight, you realize how potent ridicule can be. Even emperors who drowned cities in marble couldn't silence a clever rhyme repeated by every drunk citizen the next morning. The humor mixes with music. A troupe of mimes performs a dance parody of Saturnalia, complete with slaves pretending to command senators, their exaggerated bows and stomps turning the inversion into comedy gold. The crowd, fresh from the real festival, cackles at the absurdity of seeing it reenacted. The sharpest barbs, though, are directed at indulgence itself. A satirist stands alone, cup in hand, and declares, "Rome eats gold, drinks pearls, and burps empire." The audience gasps, then bursts into laughter that sounds a little too nervous. That's the beauty of satire. It tells the truth wrapped in jest, leaving you unsure whether to clap or cringe. And here's the irony. The satirists mock indulgence while participating in it. They sip wine between lines, recline on couches during intermissions, and happily pocket coins from wealthy patrons who laugh at the very vices they'll indulge in tomorrow. Hypocrisy, again, is part of the show. By the end of the night, your cheeks ache from laughing, though you know the humor has teeth. The torchlight flickers low, the performers bow, and the crowd disperses, still chuckling lines they'll repeat at home. You step into the street thinking how strange it is that in Rome, even mockery of excess became its own form of entertainment. Pleasure, parody, and politics all tangled together until you can't tell where one ended and the other began. And as you wander on, you sense the satire will not stop the excess. It only makes it shine brighter, more ridiculous, more inevitable. The city laughs at itself and then keeps right on feasting. The echo of satirical laughter still rings in your ears as you drift deeper into the night. But slowly, the tone of the city shifts. The torchlight feels harsher, the streets emptier, and the air smells not only of wine and roses, but also of something heavier: smoke, sweat, even a faint edge of desperation. You begin to notice what Rome's indulgence looks like when the jokes fade. The decline of decorum, where the city's wild nights mirror its looming instability. You pass a once proud villa, whose marble steps are stained with spilled wine, and whose gate creaks unattended. Inside, couches lie overturned, broken amphorae scatter shards across the floor, and someone snores loudly in a corner. The party has ended, but the wreckage remains. What once seemed glorious excess now looks careless, even dangerous. You can't help thinking, how long can an empire pour its energy into revelry without consequence? A mainstream fact steadies your musings. Roman historians like Tacitus and Ammianus Marcellinus often linked moral decline to political decline, blaming indulgence and decadence for weakening Rome. Historians still argue whether this is truth or propaganda. After all, empires don't collapse simply because too many people drank too much wine. But the association is powerful. The late empire especially was criticized for endless feasts while its borders burned. Here's your quirky tidbit. The emperor Elagabalus was said to serve peas filled with pearls, or to host dinners where guests had to eat food dyed in only one color. Such stunts dazzled some but horrified others, fueling the idea that Rome was eating itself into ruin. Tonight, as you imagine peas crunching with jewels, you almost gag, not from the pearls, but from the sheer absurdity of it. The streets reveal cracks beneath the glitter. You see beggars huddled by walls, while torches light yet another feast in the distance. A slave staggers past, carrying empty amphorae, muttering curses under his breath. Groups of young men, drunk from Saturnalia, shove one another until a fight breaks out. Fists thudding, sandals skidding. A guard wanders by, shrugs, and keeps walking. Decorum isn't just slipping, It's shrugged away. Joke number 1 comes from irony itself. A man dressed as Bacchus, still wrapped in vines from a parade, loudly proclaims that Rome will never fall, then trips into a gutter and splashes wine-stained water over himself. Joke 2. A nobleman insists he's sober while missing his own doorway 3 times before collapsing inside. Joke 3. A dog steals a whole roast from an unattended table, leaving aristocrats arguing as if the theft were a philosophical problem about fate. Yet the humor doesn't erase the unease. You recall the senators who warned about luxury, the satirists who mocked it, the courtesans who wielded it. And now you see the other side. Streets dirtier, tempers sharper, wealth clashing with poverty more visibly. The city is still magnificent, marble columns, golden temples, voices raised in song. But beneath the glitter is a sense that the balance tilts toward chaos. Historians still debate whether Rome's so-called decadence truly caused its fall, or whether it was simply the symptom of deeper crises: political corruption, military overreach, economic strain. But tonight, as you step over shards of broken amphorae, the two feel indistinguishable. Indulgence becomes both symbol and scapegoat. You wander into a tavern at the edge of the Suburra, Rome's poorer district. Inside, the revelry is different, louder, rougher, less adorned. Here, wine is cheap and watered. Food is simple bread and cheese, and laughter is edged with bitterness. A man curses the emperor between gulps. Another sings a crude song about senators. It strikes you that indulgence spreads across every class, but its form shifts. Silk and pearls for the elite, dice games and sour wine for the poor. Yet both share the same release, the same sense of shrugging off tomorrow's burdens. You sit, sip, and realize Rome's nights no longer feel like moments of joy. They feel like distractions. Bread, circuses, and flesh, all designed to smother the truth that the empire is stretched thin. The laughter is real, but so is the exhaustion beneath it. By the time you step back into the cool air, dawn is only a breath away. The streets are littered, the lamps sputtering, and the last echoes of music fade. You sense the city itself sighing, tired from its own indulgence. Rome still stands, proud and immense, but in the silence between torchlight and sunrise, you can almost hear the marble cracking. The marble streets are quiet now, the dawn still far off, and Rome lies sprawled like a drunken giant catching its breath. You wander slowly, past gates half shut, fountains stained red from wine, and torches smoldering down to dying embers. For the first time in many nights, the city does not pull you toward another banquet or courtyard. Instead, it feels as though the empire itself is exhaling, leaving you in the echo. What remains after all the laughter, all the satire, all the indulgence? Only whispers, faint but persistent, drifting through the centuries. You pause by a statue of Bacchus, its stone face shadowed with streaks of spilled wine, and you realize how deliberately Rome fused pleasure with permanence. These feasts weren't only indulgence, they were a cultural memory, built into marble, mosaics, and verse. Ovid's poetry, Martial's epigrams, Juvenal's bitter laughter, all of them preserved nights like the ones you've wandered through. embedding them in history as surely as victories and conquests. A mainstream fact steadies your thought. Archaeological finds in Pompeii reveal frescoes of banquets, erotic scenes, and graffiti sati celebrating wild nights. These weren't hidden away. They were painted on walls, scratched into stone, woven into daily life. Historians still argue whether Rome's obsession with such imagery reflects typical households or the exceptional indulgence of certain towns. But the evidence remains. The culture of revelry left its mark in pigment and plaster. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some taverns, graffiti doubled as menus and as brag sheets. "I drank 10 cups here," one boasts. Another warns, "Beware the watered wine." 2,000 years later, you're still chuckling at drunk Romans leaving Yelp reviews in Latin. But beneath the humor lies the question. What do these nights mean across time? The empire rose, ruled the known world, and eventually fractured. Yet what endures isn't only its laws or aqueducts, it's also its capacity to party like civilization itself depended on it. The whispers you hear now are less about who ate peacock tongues or who drowned in rose petals, and more about the universal truth. Humans, no matter the century, crave release. Joke number 1 drifts in memory. A senator collapsing into a boar platter. Joke 2, the philosopher tripping on luxury sandals. Joke 3, the merchant crowned priest of fruit for falling into figs. You smile, because these jokes could have happened last week at a wedding, or yesterday at a college party. Rome may be ancient, but its humor is startlingly modern. Historians still debate whether these indulgences were Rome's fatal flaw or its secret strength. Did pleasure weaken discipline, or did it keep society from imploding under its own weight? You realize there may never be an answer. The truth is, indulgence did both. It sustained Rome's spirit, then haunted its legacy. And now, centuries later, it still shapes the way we imagine the empire, not only as builders of roads and laws, but as revelers beneath torchlight, wine-stained and laughing. You find yourself back at the Tiber, the water sluggish and silver under the fading moon. The city around you finally quiets. You lean on the stone balustrade, listening, and in the hush you hear them. Echoes of music, of dice clattering, of whispered verses, of satirists' punchlines, of courtesans' laughter, of emperors clapping their hands to summon the next act. These sounds linger, not as ghosts, but as reminders. Rome partied as hard as it conquered. You close your eyes, letting the whispers fade into the hum of the river. Tomorrow, the city will rise, sweep its streets, polish its temples, and march on as though nothing happened. But you know the truth. Rome carried its nights within it, and those nights still ripple through history, reminding us that civilization has always balanced on the thin edge between order and indulgence. Now, the whispers grow fainter, the torches die, and the empire dissolves into dream. Your eyelids grow heavy as the marble streets blur into shadows. And so, with the last echoes of laughter fading, let your breathing slow. Imagine the torchlight dimming until it is only a glow at the back of your mind, warm but soft, no longer demanding your attention. The marble arches and painted walls recede into mist, their sharp edges softening, their voices drifting into silence. What remains is the rhythm of your own breath, steady, calm, carrying you gently away from the noise of the city. You picture the river again, wide and slow, the moonlight stretching across its surface. The water does not hurry, does not strain. It glides, carrying reflections of temples and villas without judgment. Let your own thoughts float the same way, carried effortlessly downstream, no longer clinging to arguments or feasts or laughter. Just drifting, just resting. The air is cooler now, freed from incense and wine. You feel it wrap around you like a light blanket, whispering of peace rather than frenzy. The sounds of Rome's revelry dissolve into something distant, almost like waves breaking softly on a shore far away. You no longer need to follow them. You can let them go, knowing you've walked through the city's nights and survived their intensity. In their place comes quiet, a slow heartbeat, a gentle exhale, the steady rise and fall of your chest. Your eyelids grow heavier still, and the stories that swirled with music and laughter now fold themselves into memory, waiting for another night. For now, there is only stillness, only rest. So let the echoes fade. Let the city sleep. Let yourself drift. Rome's nights have ended, and yours can too.